Hey guys, welcome back to Describely, and today we are going to discuss about floats in Python. So what is float? So we can say float is a number that has a fractional part. So if we say, let's say age equals to 100, so this is going to be a number, but if we say, let's say price equals to 10.5, so this is going to be float. So let me try to print and these two things. So we can say age and then type of age. Let me put this in new line, and here I can say price, and here I can say type of price. If I run the code, you will see the first variable that we created is, the type of that is variable is int, and the second one that we created, the type of that variable is float. So this is how we declare a float here. If you want to convert this age to a floating point number, right, there is a built-in function in Python that you can use. So we can say age in float, and then we can pass the float this age variable, right? And let me try to print all these three here. So you can see first variable, that is our age, that is integer. Second variable that we declared float, right, that is a type of float. But third variable, that was uh, integer here. So age was integer, right, but we passed that into a float function, so it got converted into float. And you can see the 0 after the decimal here. So that means whenever we pass an integer inside this float function, right, it's going to convert that into a float number or floating point number. So this conversion is also known as typecasting. So here we are changing the type int to float. So this is known as the typecasting. Now what other things you can do with this float function, right? So let's say you have a variable, and I have a price of tomato, and this is 100 rupees per kg. So if I say like this in double quotes, and if I print the type price of tomato, this is not try, this is type. And if I run the code, you will see this is a string. This is not considering it as an integer. And if I put zero point 0.5 here, again if I print it, you will see this is still a string, right? So whenever we want to define a floating point number, we cannot write it within a string. But if you want to convert this string into a floating point number, how you can do that? So for that, we can pass this inside a float function. So if I run the command again, you will see now this 100.5 has been converted to float. So you can use this function to convert a string into a float, but you can only pass a valid number that can be converted to a floating point number. If I pass, let's say 10.5 r, right, and if I try to run the code, you will see could not convert a string to float 10.5 r. So this is not a valid floating point number. So that's why we are getting this value error. Now let's see how we can declare a negative floating point number, right? So we can say price in, or we can say temperature can be negative. So we can say temp equals to minus 4.5. So this is how you declare a negative floating point number. And if you have this in string, right, so you can say, let's say temp in str, and you can have this like minus 4.5. And let me convert this temp in str to float. So this we can achieve by calling the float function. So in the float function, you can pass this is a valid floating point number inside the double quote. So we can pass this inside the float function, and this will convert this to a floating point number. So let me try to print this. So if I run the code, okay, I need to remove this r here, and let me put a separator just to separate the code, right? So if I run it again, you will see uh, this minus 4.5 is float, and this minus 4.5 is an string. right here. But when we pass that string minus 4.5 to a float function, this got converted to float. So this is how we can convert a either positive floating point number or negative floating point number or even an integer into a float using this float function. Thank you so much for watching this video. In the next video, I am going to discuss about Boolean.